What's going on, guys? I've noticed that there is no videos on how to bag a Hyundai Elantra N. So today, we're going to be posting how to bag a Hyundai Elantra N. I will be explaining some of the tricky parts, some of the simple parts, and then all around basis of how to do it. If you want to see more, give us a like, subscribe, and I would try to go ahead and send out some more videos. But till then, let's do this. So what's going on, boys? My name is Code Turbo N, aka Alex. I am a new Elantra N owner. I've just recently purchased one of my own, so did my fiance, and this one is actually my fiance's car. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I used to be on coils way before everyone started really going crazy with bags, and I kind of got converted. So we kind of went a little crazy with these Elantra ends, and we decided to go bags on these setups. So this was kind of like my first run around. Just like you guys, I was kind of looking around online, looking for some information, try to see if I can kind of get a ground idea of like where to start. Not a lot of information, but I'm here to save you. Majority of the time, if you're gonna get bags, as long as you have preparation set up, it's pretty no-brainer. My setup here, I kind of swung a little crazy in the air. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I didn't really have a plan. I probably should have. But here, you can see me taking the rear suspension out. I am unplugging the adaptive suspension that's going on in the back. There's also adaptive suspension in the front. When you go into N mode, it stiffens the shocks and the suspension a little bit just to kind of give you a little bit more of a track feel. All of this can be unplugged. And on the bottom of the suspension, that's where it normally sits. So here, I'm just messing with the control arm, seeing where everything needs to be unbolted first. And of course, my fiance is helping me out. But I'm pretty sure I might have done this a different way compared to somebody else. But hey, I have a lift and I had some tools. Might as well get to cracking. So, to explain a little bit what I did here, I started tackling the rear suspension, taking it off the sensors, looking at the bolts that I will soon here explain in the next clip. I was looking at a few of the bolts that were holding on the lower control arm, and I was wondering if I could just take those out and then take off the bolts on the top. Wrong. Finds out that there's kind of a bit of a process there. There's 3 bolts on the lower control arm, and then there's a bolt holding the upper control arm. That upper control arm is actually holding a little bit of tension on the lower control arm. So in order to take off the lower control arm, which is actually kind of like a lower control arm with a bucket, you have to swing all of it down. So in order to do that, you have to kind of take everything off. But I'm going to let this explaining come up front, help you out a little bit. But as long as you get the bases, take the suspension out in the rear, have everything disconnected, and then just replace it with the newer suspension, you should be golden. The front as well, it's the same idea. However, you may not have a lift. That's okay. As long as the vehicle is up in the air and able to be accessed underneath, it's all the same idea. But let's explain what I'm doing over here on the bottom right corner. This is my first time making a video on YouTube, let alone explaining a tutorial, so please bear with me. But the bottom right, I'm actually fixing the shock absorber that's from the OEM. The housing is sitting on top. I'm trying to take off the housing and put it on the new shock, which is, I guess, a little bit hazy when you're trying to picture that in your head right now. But I'll explain it here in the next clip. But basically, the only thing that you need in the rear is the rubber bucket that you have on top of the springs. You're going to reuse that, and you're going to reuse the housing for the shock absorber. So once you reuse those on the newer devices, on the new suspension, you should be good to go. Everything is usually plug and play. The only thing that really makes everything work is the air. the air is very important. So the airlines and how the way you're going to set the airlines is key. That's probably your biggest problem here. Especially when the bags are not sitting correctly inside the bucket. They can air up and air out a little bit funky, a little bit in a weird way. Especially if you have that bottom rubber garment sitting underneath the springs. If you put that underneath the bag, it won't have it straight, so it will have it a little bit angled. It won't sit good. So you want to take that rubber bottom garment from the bottom of the spring and chuck that out the window. Or maybe save it, depending on who you are. And this next clip, I'm going to probably start talking. So I'm going to go ahead and let that run. But you might hear me interrupt here and there.
Got airbags coming from Yellow Speed Racing with 3/8 lines. They're big boys. Usually a lot of people steer away from these because these are the heavier lines. These are harder lines to kind of mess with. But we wanted to get 2 compressors for this setup for maximum air out and air height with quickness. So 3/8 will get you the air quicker, and 2 compressors will get you the air quicker. Also, if one goes down, you can have the other one. It kind of works out in the long run. So far, we've already taken out 1/4 so that we can explain what's the process, and then I can show on the other side. But basically, you take off that top hat.
Not top hat. Top
2 bolts
housing.
at the top.
Housing.
I forget whether they're 17s. I think they're 17s. I don't think they're 14s. I think they're 17s. You take them off at the top, and you take off the bottom one. However, it won't really take off too much tension from the bucket. You actually need to take off this bolt from the bottom of the knuckle, and then to relieve some more tension, you need to take off that top one, the upper control arm. The upper control arm, for some reason, gives you enough tension on the bottom because it kind of twists out a little bit, so it won't get the bottom bolt out. Not this one, this one. So you take this top one out, relieve some tension, and then you can be able to loosen that out.
Mind you, if you're on the ground, a regular jack might help you out in this situation.
Then you take off the sway bar link. The sway bar link also prevents the bucket from coming down completely. You don't need to touch that bolt. And then finally, after you take off the shock, then the bucket should be able to come down more, and then the spring comes right out. Then you just do the reverse. Put the bag right in, keep the bottom rubber garment on the bottom. The top rubber garment you put on top of the bag right here, and it just sits right in there. That's just to align everything so that when it does get everything situated, you're sitting inside the bucket. Then the shock goes on. The shock, you always want to put it on the bottom. It's easier. And then you could just press down on the shock and then it goes back up. However, this top,
Pain in the
ass, usually comes off this top right here. And it has a bolt on the very top. A lot of people are intimidated by it, but just grab some dikes, grab it on the bottom here or on the top, wherever you can grab it. You take off this little socket there, you can grab it at some point, and then get that sucker off. Just throw that sucker off of there. You should be good to go. And then you just do the reverse for that shock. However, this has a sensor. This is for the dampening. The shock that they have set, it has a pressurized dampening, and the sensor kind of repressurizes it when you're sport, end mode, etc. In this case, we're not going to be using it anymore, so I just tucked it up there, and it's just freewheeling. It's going to sit there, and it's going to marinate. So we'll keep that in there. That's how you kind of bolt that up on the back side. We'll come back in a little bit. We're going to do the other side here on this right rear, and then we'll copycat that side, and then we'll go ahead and show you what we do on the front.
So obviously we started getting it cracking, and here you can see on the right side we started having some bolts already taken out, starting to go ahead and loosen everything up. It's really fairly simple once you kind of have the grasp and idea of what you're doing. Just take your time, don't rush it. Here you can see that I have majority of the rear right side almost taken apart. At this point, I'm pretty sure I'm fitting the bag in here. The spring is out and the shock is out. But obviously putting in the bag on this side, that's when I noticed that the rubber garment on the bottom wasn't going to sit well. So I had to remove it from the other side, tighten everything back up on the other side, then come back to the right side and finish that up. However, as you can tell, I'm double checking all those bolts and nuts, even on both sides, just to make sure that everything is nice and tight. If you have anything loose after you installed everything, you're going to hear it. You're going to feel wobbles. You're going to hear some clunking. I'm not a fan of that. So, knowing me, I just go back every once in a while. Even if I'm double checking myself, I like to double tap it. Make sure you hit it with the Ugga and then make sure it's nice and tight. Here, lowering the the lower control arm as everything is nice and loose. And letting go of the tension so that I can get that spring out and basically pop in that bag. That bag is replacing that spring and everything should be good to go. Once the spring is able to be taken out, as you can see, the bucket just falls right down. You can go ahead and play with it while it's in there. Give it a little wiggle, pause, and sneak out that spring. Once you get that spring out, you go to the rubber garments. As like I said, get the bottom rubber garment out there. You do not need it. And then just keep the top one. Once you take out that spring, go ahead and grab the bag and then just pop in the bag. Mind you, I will be coming to explain what we need to do for the bags and the fittings. I do have a little trick for that, so we'll get to that point.
Alright guys, this is what I was talking about. This is what it looks like when it comes right out of the car. Take out the sensor, take out the bottom, and then take out the top. The top is what holds the weight, obviously high up by itself. Take off the tension on the bottom, and then you should be able to take out the two on the top. If you hold it, boom, pops right out. So, take off this top. That's what you want to get right there. So you want this housing for the new shock. The new shock is going to be like this. This is the old shock, the new shock. You need the housing. So, in order to do that, see this icky little bolt right here? Some people like to go ahead and throw a open end wrench and put it onto that, and then hold I think it's like a 8 or a 10. Don't take my word for that. And then you grab the end and then you try to unwind it. Too long. If you grab this socket right here, this is a little protection socket going on here. Take off the protection socket, you get the little plastic unrolled over the lip over there. So it just kind of unrolls over the lip. Swindles down, comes right down. Throw a vice grip on there, hold that sucker on there, hold on to it, and hit it with the impact. I'll show you. Alright, so got your vice grips on there. You grab that sucker right here by the vice grip. Get your impact, it's 17 by the way. Throw it on there. You're gonna have to hold the housing. Use your knees. Somebody else can grab it for you. Go ahead, loosen that baby off. Comes right off. Take off the housing. You're gonna need the rubber garment. Throw that back on. And this is what you need right here. That bolt, bye-bye. New shock comes with one. New shock comes with the bolt that you go ahead and throw right on there. So you take off this one with your housing that you just took off of OEM. Throw it on here. Go ahead, seal that up. Now, to put it on the correct way. All right, to do it the right way, really gotta make sure you have the right tools for this. Open end wrench socket is probably your best bet situation here. Because with the wrench, you can put it around and you have an extra lip. See that extra lip? It goes into the housing and actually hold on to the nut while you tighten. With the Allen wrench, you throw it on to the top, you hold on to it, and then you tighten it up. Now you're gonna be doing this for a little bit, so don't think that it's gonna happen right away, but you're tightening down your rear shock, so take your time. Now you probably could have done this a little quicker if you had like an Allen socket on an impact or something like that, but nothing wrong with doing it old school, Shake tight. God damn. I'll do it. There you go. Once you know it's pretty tight, you spin the housing. Kind of feels pretty snug on there. Now, for the people that are wondering, what about the rest of the shock? You can do whatever you like. So, the actual height of the OEM shock is a little bit bigger. So you can go back to that OEM size by untwisting the bottom and then tightening it back up, and it will stay at that height. If you want it all the way maxed out, you raise the ring all the way to the top and you spin the bottom up to the top of the threads. See how it kind of like locks in? Once it's locked in, that's maxed out. It goes all the way to the bottom. It can't go any further, obviously, because of the bottom. So you can tell if you're maxed out if you can loosen it and go further down. And you can really tell, like, that's a lot more, right? If you twist it all the way in, you eliminated that height. So if you twist it all in for full max, lower the locking ring all the way down to the bottom once it's fully locked in, and then you should be good to go. I always suggest tapping it with a hammer and a screwdriver just to kind of make sure that it's nice and locked. A nice little solid impact will make sure it's tight.
So here, boys, I'm explaining about the fitting on the bottom of the airbag in the rear. You could skip a part of this, but if you're interested about the OEM fitting with the bag, I would highly listen to this.
Bottom, so that way the line can stay with the control arm. For example, if you're aired out or you're driving and you're hitting potholes constantly and stuff like that, the line has a tendency to stretch. So if it's up higher or longer and it's hitting potholes and stuff like that, it will stretch that line out, most likely pulling that line out of the system or pulling it out of the bag. To prevent that, if you have a straight line, straight from the movement, meaning on the bottom of the lower control arm, so the lower control arm is moving to a limited positions. Same thing with the airline in that area, it would be at a limited position. So you wouldn't have to worry or stress about the actual length of the line. This angled one that comes with the bag, if you have that, it's not really going to be the best ideal situation when the line is not really straight. It would have to go at an angle. So the ideal situation is to get a straight adapter. Depending on what you do, is 3/8 to 1/4, and whatever lines you run. And this one in particular is going from 1/4 to 3/8.
we decided to go bigger lines. Go big or go home, right? You know what I mean? Just air out quicker, and it will have a better air response, and it will look faster when it airs out and stuff like that, and when it airs up too. In order to run that straight line from the lower control arm, you throw one of those straight adapters, and now the actual fitting can go straight to the line inside the bucket, and then tuck through that little hole that's on the bottom lower control arm, straight to the line, up to the trunk. And I'll show you the trunk setup in a little bit. All right, to explain a little bit more so they can kind of see what's going on. The bag itself is going to be inside this bucket right here. You can still take it out. Once there's no air in it and you're first installing it, there's plenty of wiggle room. But obviously with that fitting being installed, we'll go ahead and wiggle that in there, angle it up, place it down on the bottom. The rubber garment that you have previously from the spring that you take out, you're going to reuse the top, not the bottom. The bottom usually sits inside this little hole, and it has a little position to stay inside the bucket. If you use it, it's going to offset the bag a little bit. I highly suggest just taking it out, having it sitting inside the groove in the bucket, and then putting back the rubber housing on top. The reason why is because there's very limited amount of space. That bag is barely sitting inside that bucket, and if it's moving around and airing out, it's going to go ahead and squeeze inside that bucket, and it might rip or tear. You do not want that. The more you have a better position on the bottom, the top will sit inside this rubber. Just go ahead and throw that rubber on top of the bag itself. We'll call it a day. Once we have everything wired up and managed up, when we have the vehicle down, that whole chassis and everything, the lower control arm will meet up, and it should be intact. Once there's air inside that bag and it inflates, it should hug it, staying in place. So to explain it in better aspects up close, all of these bolts that I'm pointing out, you're gonna have to take off to lower the lower control arm to get the spring out. However, don't forget that bolt for the upper control arm. You're gonna have to take that off because it actually holds the whole spindle in a little bit. So you would have to take that off, take this off, and this off. Then it should have enough room to come down off the spindle. Mind you, it is going to give you some play and fold down a little bit. Don't let it hang for too long. I don't know. You just don't want to let it hang for forever, right? So once you take out the spring, go ahead and throw the shock back up there. Once you change the shock housing, you put on the aftermarket one with the OEM housing, throw that back up there, and then tighten it back up. Same thing on the other side, obviously. However, when you have the bags in, remember that the straight fittings are in now. That's why. Straight fittings are going to go right here. And I'm going to go ahead and throw the air line right through here. Not precisely in this spot. I'm still kind of debating on where it's going to go. But my idea is to get it through the arm, connect the air line through that fitting. And maybe this side, I'll switch it up and go underneath it instead of going through it, but we'll see. I'll come back to that. For now, the wiring and the air lines for the front is also going to go through here. I made some holes here at the top of the trunk with grommets, so it's leak proof, and it's going to go down with the fueling hoses all the way up top of the tank through the OEM area where it's nice and tucked. And then I'm going to try to have everything tucked up like OEM so it's under the tray. Once we get up to the top,
I'm going to go ahead and see where I'm going to go and thread it through. But the idea is to thread it through with the regular lines as they are uninterrupted. And for the front, in order to do the front, it's like regular struts. Take off the sway bar end link, and then you take off the 2 bolts towards the hub, take off the bolts at the top. Now, okay, so this sensors right here, one of them is actually a set of sensors that controls a good amount of stuff in your car. The other one is the actual adaptive sensor for the suspension. You want to keep the adaptive suspension unplugged, and then you want to keep the other plug plugged in. Don't forget about that. And the front is fairly simple, boys. It's not too hard. If anything, I feel like the front is actually a little bit easier than the rear. That sounds a little weird, but you just take off the strut and then just put in the new strut in. Boom, 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 boom. You know what I mean? Just get to cracking. So I've been told you can max these out all the way to the bottom, and you can. However, it's not wise to. You can always go lower, but when you want to air up, you might not be able to air up enough. So I'm leaving about 2 inches of gap, and I'm gonna call it about 2 ring size nails, if that makes sense. That's about 2 inches for me. Go in. That way, I know that the car has enough room to air out and room to air up. So once you have it at a nice set height that you want, I just so happen to put on a set of possibly around 2 inches or so of height. You go ahead and lock in the bottom ring. You tighten up the bottom sleeve up to the suspension, and then tighten the ring down into the sleeve. And then you do the same to hold up the top ring. And then with the locks, you hold one set to the actual locking ring, and then you hold another set to the top to the actual stoner. So once I get this dialed in, we'll go ahead and throw this in the car. Now boys, these locks are crucial to make sure they're nice and tight. Earlier I explained to tap it with like a screwdriver and a hammer. That just locks it in place. That makes it kind of like nice and snug. These tools are designed to keep it, adjustable, and you can tighten and loosen it. With a hammer and a screwdriver, you just kind of tighten the rings into place and keeps it nice and snug. So I just suggest making sure that you know what height you're trying to set it at, get an idea, and then go ahead and lock them in when they're in the vehicle. Here I made sure that they're kind of like ideally where I wanted them, but obviously when I got them in the vehicle, I just tightened them up. So just wanted to remind you. And that's about it, boys. I don't want to keep this long, but once you put the shocks in, line up the airlines, and have the wiring set up, it is pretty simple. The wiring is really plug and play. Just follow the instructions on that airlift box and you should be good. The airlines, you guys kind of got an idea here on the video. Not too shabby. Once you set those up, you're good to go. Air out, let them know. A Hyundai Elantra can also look pretty stancy. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.